with me tonight. I'm not sure how this is going to go. I was reviewing some film. I went back and watched Seth's, and he did such a good job last time. I was trying to find a way I could, be able to translate some of the things he did good. So I had to play the piano because I can't do that myself, and I'm definitely not going to speak as clearly and good as he did. But hopefully it'll go well. The thought I kind of had, I was having an issue kind of finding. I don't feel like I'm as prepared as I should be. But I was Sunday afternoon. I was reading something online and on Twitter, and I saw something, and I saw that Jonathan Edwards was trending. Of course, everybody knows who that is. The sinner's in the hand of an angry God, and you don't really see stuff like that on there a lot. So I clicked on it, and it was somebody, and they were saying how they never understood the appeal of that message, how they served a God of love, and how it would make most sinners run away and stuff like that, which of course we do, as we heard Dad preach Sunday and then singing. We do definitely serve a God of love. He loves us more than we can even imagine.
Amen.
But I think that the overall sentiment that person was getting across just kind of struck me as, I think that's the problem we have a lot, and just across the world right now, is that people want what I guess tickles their ears, and I think we're beginning to lose the fear of God. That
right.
Hearing stories from Granddaddy and Grandpa, and just some of the older people in my life talking about how it seems like even people who didn't go to church back then and didn't grow up in homes that respected the church house, they still had more respect for the church and the things of God and living the way that God would have us to than a lot of people who go to church every Sunday now do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it just got to thinking, and really it's going to be a lot of reading, and if my legs start to give out, I'll just summarize the rest, but it is a lot of reading, so I don't expect anybody to turn, but it should be for the better, because I don't have to formulate the sentences on my own. But I'm just going to kind of go down through, and honestly, it's just, I just started looking at examples whenever I saw that, and there's so many examples of what happens when we lose sight of God and when we go against His commandments.
Right.
And although, like I said, although He is, of course, faithful and just to forgive, there is consequences, and that's
Amen.
That's
right.
I'm going to be going through. And so the first, just the downfall is the first that going against God can cause, and that'll be in Genesis chapter 3. And of course, this is the greatest downfall in mankind, because it's the downfall of all of man. And start with verse number 1, which says, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat." And I meant to read chapter 2, verse 17 first, and it says, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, from the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." And so I meant to read that first, because that's God's clear commandment of what they could not do. And
right.
There, what I read, we can see that they did it. And then in verse number 16 of chapter 3, it says, "And to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. And I think this is the best example of how our sin doesn't just affect us sometimes, and it doesn't just have repercussions for us. Of course, this is the greatest example, because we're still reaping the effects of Adam and Eve's sin from all those years ago. And
Right.
It just, God explicitly told them what they couldn't do, and they did it. And like I said, it's not going to be, there's not a ton to expound upon. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just right there. And then in 1 Samuel chapter number 15, starting in verse number 1. And it says, Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And once again, we see God's command. And then skipping over to verse 9, it says, But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. Then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And then in verse number 26, it says, And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. And there again, like I said, I don't really know what to say. I just feel like it's self-explanatory in a way, but there's not much I can add. But Saul, he sinned. God told him explicitly what to do, and it's just the same way for us. All the commands that God's gave us in the Bible, this is our roadmap. This is how we need to live our lives by the Bible.
Right.
And Saul, he rejected what God told him to do, and he lost his kingship. He wasn't,
right.
He wasn't able to be king. And it's not just that. And of course, we read on down, and I don't have anything to read, but it's a whole, saga with Saul and David, for years to come, and it just shows, one sin, and that was the end of Saul's reign as king. And then my second little thing was the destruction that transgressing against God can cause, and really these can all fit together. I just kind of broke it down for my own reading there, and it's in Genesis chapter 6. Starting in verse number 5. Says, And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And here, of course, we see right before the ark, and something that I remembered while I was reading this was when we went down to see the ark. I'm sure everybody that went probably remembers there was one, exhibit there. It had a bunch of children's books and was talking about how the ark today is portrayed as like a children's story, and you see a bunch of movies and children's books about the ark, and it's about the animals on the boat. And of course, God did do I mean, that was a marvelous miracle that he was able to do, Noah being able to build the ark, and but it's really not a children's story. I mean, outside of Noah and his family, the entire population of the earth was killed because of their sins. So, and then reading there in verse 11, it says, "The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the ark." And then skip into chapter 7, verse number 22. It says, "All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died." And there again, I mean, it's not there. I mean, I think the exhibit there at the ark did a better job than what I can say, but I mean, it may seem harmless, but in taking a story like that and making it into something that's put out as more of a children's story and something like that, I mean, kind of the overall point of what I'm trying to get across, it does take away from the fear of God that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I didn't think of it until we saw that really, but I mean, I never thought of it that way until we saw that exhibit. But just the thought of God destroying all of humankind, and how that can be perceived in a way that makes it to where, how that can be portrayed in a way that makes it to where people don't realize the might that God showed in doing that. I think that's a lot more dangerous than I ever realized before. And then in so that was all for that one, and then the distress that it can cause. And in Jonah chapter 1, starting in verse number 1, it says, "Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me." But Jonah rose up to flee into Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. And then in verse number 1 and 2, I mean, we see God's command to Jonah that he was to go to Nineveh and preach in the city. And once again, he disobeyed God, and he sent a storm in the ship that he escaped in. And then reading on down to number 8, it says, or skipping on down to number 8, it says, "Then said they unto him, Tell us, we pray thee, for whose cause this evil is upon us? What is thine occupation, and whence comest thou? What is thy country, and of what people art thou? And he said unto them, I am an Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which made the sea and the dry land. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he had fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them." And there again, I think that's another example of how sin can affect the people that's around us. And I mean, it says here that the men were exceedingly afraid. It doesn't, I mean, I'm sure Jonah was as well, but the men that were with him were exceedingly afraid. And I think that just, again, is an example of how, I mean, the distress that my sin could cause to my family or to the church here. It just takes me screwing up one time and something that doesn't even seem like that major of a sin to bring reproach upon this church, upon my family, upon my friends. It ruins a testimony, and I just think that this was another example of that, how our sin doesn't just affect us. How, I mean, it could be as much as, I mean, I know everybody says it, but we could be the only light to some of my friends, and then they see us falling into the same stuff that they know that we've been preaching against, or that we know that we're against and that a Christian shouldn't do, and then they see us doing it, and if we're the only example that they've had in their lives, I mean, that could send them to hell, and that's just the reality of it. I mean, that may have been our chance to continue to be a witness to them, and it could just, I mean, it can ruin it that quick. And then skipping on down to verse number 15, it says, "So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord, and made vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And then of course I assume that Jonah was in distress there. I know I would be if I was swallowed by a fish or anything of that nature. But I mean, that just goes to show. And I mean, you could go back through all of these though. I was going to say this at the end, but the good thing about it though is God is so faithful and just to forgive. I mean, in Jonah's case, I mean, he prayed, God forgave him. He ended up going. The best thing to do, I believe, and I believe it's what the Bible teaches when we make a mistake, is repent and then go do what God told us to do originally. Right. And see, that's what Jonah did. And I mean, you could go through most of the examples that I've gave and will continue to give, but I was just reading on kind of ahead while I was looking down, and then in 1 Chronicles chapter 14, I'm trying to figure out where to do this arrow to. Sorry, actually Nehemiah chapter 1. Sorry. Verse number 3, and it says, "And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire." And in verse number 6 and 7, I figure I'll go ahead and read this, but I think this is another good example of just repenting and asking God to forgive us, and then rebuilding on what God's original plan was. And in verse number 6 it says, "Let thine ear now be attentive and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night, for the children of Israel thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandest thy servant Moses." And there again, like I just said, I just think that's always the best approach, is just immediately. And I mean, here in Nehemiah's case, he was interceding on the behalf of a whole nation of people. And I mean, that's just how Jesus does for us when we're saved, interceding to God. I mean, that's really our only hope. But here in just a worldly sense on this world, I mean, it can be our prayer. It may not seem like it's effective at the time. I know that I've battled that a lot as far as with my friends and people I'd like to see saved. But it can be our prayer and our example, and I mean, us interceding on behalf of somebody that in the end can be the reason that they're saved or turn their life around. Right. And then now turn into 1 Chronicles, and this is a title of this one, the death, how transgressing against God causes death. And like I said, that's just more so to help me keep these separated here. And then 1 Chronicles chapter, I'm sorry, I was doing them again. It's actually Ruth chapter number 1. Chapter number 1, starting in verse number 1. And it says, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread." And here, I mean, of course, Dad's been preaching a lot out of, or had been preaching a lot out of Ruth, but we see at the very beginning what kind of opens the whole book up is Naomi's family leaving and going to a place that is God's washpot, really. And I mean, both her sons died, her husband died, and I mean, something as simple as, I mean, just they thought they were moving to sustain themselves, but really in the end, they just needed to trust God. And I mean, that can apply to our lives. And we may think that we have a better, I mean, I'm not quite there yet. I'm happy as a DH Lawrence construction employee, but we may think that we have a better job opportunity, or that we need to move off somewhere or do something. But if it's not in God's will, no matter how it looks on paper, it's not going to lead to any good. It may seem like it's leading to good when the money's in the bank account and all that, but it won't do anything but separate us from God. And then even in her daughter-in-law here in Orpah, I forgot to write the verse down, but we see that Naomi's just distressed. They're going back to that even, calls from the death of all her loved ones. In her distress, she was just beside herself and wasn't the example that she needed to be to her daughter-in-laws. And Orpah, as far as we know, returned back to the gods that she had been. And I mean, the Bible doesn't say, but if she stayed in that lifestyle, then she never got to experience the wonders that Ruth did by sticking with her. But at the same time, you can't blame her as much, because the woman of God in her life was the one who was instructing her to turn back and, in essence, leave the presence of God. And now in the First Chronicles, I believe after 3 false alarms, chapter number 14. And starting in verse number 8, and it says, "And when the Philistines heard that David was anointed king over all Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek David, and David heard of it, and went out against them, and the Philistines came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of God, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines, and wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said unto him, Go up, for I will deliver them into thine hand. So they came up to Baal-perazim, and David smote them there. Then David said, God hath broken in upon mine enemies by mine hand, like the breaking forth of waters. Therefore they called the name of that place Baal-perazim. And when they had left their gods there, David gave a commandment, and they were burned with fire. And the Philistines yet again spread themselves abroad in the valley. Therefore David inquired again of God, and God said unto him, Go not up after them, turn away from them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And it shall be, when thou shalt hear a sound of going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt go out to battle, for God has gone forth before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. David therefore did as God commanded him, and they smote the host of the Philistines from Gibeon even to Gazer. And the fame of David went out into all the land, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all the nations. And I know that was a lot of reading there, but then skipping down to chapter number 21 of First Chronicles, and verses 1 through 4, is kind of the most reading I'll have here. But it says, "And Satan stood up against Israel, and provoked David to number Israel. And David said to Joab and to the rulers of the people, Go number Israel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring the number of them to me, that I may know it. And Joab answered, The Lord make his people 100 times so many more as they be. But my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then doth my lord require this thing? Why will he be a cause of trespass to Israel? Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab. Wherefore Joab departed and went throughout all Israel and came to Jerusalem." And then verse number 7 of the same chapter, it says, "And God was displeased with this thing, therefore he smote Israel. And David said unto God, I have sinned greatly, because I have done this thing. But now I beseech thee, do away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly." And then this will be last reading here. It's in verse number 11. It says, "So Gad came to David and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Choose thee either 3 years' famine or 3 months to be destroyed before thy foes, while that the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee, or else 3 days the sword of the Lord, even the pestilence in the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the coast of Israel. Now therefore advise thyself what word I shall bring again to him that sent me. And David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait, let me fall now into the hand of the Lord, for very great are his mercies, but let me not fall into the hand of man. So the Lord sent pestilence upon Israel, and there fell of Israel 70,000 men." And there again, I know I've said it, feels like 100 times, but there again is, and it wasn't even, going back to verse number 17, this was more just, which is what I had in my lesson titled originally, but I don't know, I guess I just get in my own head. I thought of a million different things, how none of this would make sense throughout the day, but just David losing sight of God and how it was God that brought him to the victory. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in my Bible, that section there in verse number 14, 8 through 17 is actually, the little subheading there is David's victories from God. And it even says in verse number 17, "And the fame of David went out into all the land, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all nations." I mean, David was, unless, I mean, I may be wrong here, but the way I read this verse, where the fear of him, it's a little h, and I assume it's referring to David there, the fear of David upon all the nations. And I mean, David was already getting the credit from the other rulers and stuff, even though it was the Lord that was delivering him the victories. But still yet, I believe, the way I read it, I believe that the reason that he wanted the census of all that was, I'd say he probably was sitting back thinking, what an army I've amassed, what great victories they've won, and just, I mean, I think he began to get a little big-headed, and but I mean, I don't think I get big-headed very much. I don't really have anything to be proud of in myself. I've been very blessed my whole life. But it's just such an easy thing to do, though.
Right.
I mean, even something as little as, success in school. Say you make an A in a class. I mean, you have the teachers who've worked just as hard as you to prepare the lessons and all that. And so, I mean, it's always, and especially when it's in the case of God, you can never pride. I mean, I don't know. This is why I was trying to do more reading than anything. I never like to try to to talk too much at one time, it never gets good, but, my mom and dad would tell you that, but pride just never a good thing, and, I guess I'll just leave that there. And then, the last point, and I'll be honest, I had to look up synonyms for, I didn't even plan it, I had done the others were 4 Ds, and I couldn't think of a D word that meant confusing, so I had to look up synonyms, and I guess discombobulation is the word that pulled up, so that's the word we'll go with. But no, Dad does, that's how we lie. In Genesis chapter 9, in verse number 1, wait, I'm not sure what that to be reading first. Got too many arrows running around. Yeah, verse number 1, and it says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth." And then in chapter number 11, in verse number 1, and it says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad